You know what's terrifying? It's not monsters or ghosts. It's watching a child become a parent to their own broken father. It's seeing innocence forced to harden into survival. And sometimes, the only hand that reaches down to pull you out of hell belongs to someone who has been there themselves. This is a story about two damaged souls finding redemption in the most unlikely friendship. One is a boy forced to grow up before his time. The other is a man trying to outrun a past that won't let him go. And when their worlds collide in the dirt and desperation of rural America, something extraordinary happens. Not a fairy tale, not a clean resolution, but something real, raw, and utterly human. Let me take you into a world where hope is measured in weekly paychecks, where love looks like teaching someone to survive, and where the greatest act of fatherhood comes from a stranger with a criminal record. The film opens our eyes to a pattern that destroys families across generations. Wade Jones embodies a particular kind of tragedy, the man who keeps running from consequences but can never outpace himself. He's dragged his family to yet another town, making the same hollow promises he's made 100 times before. His wife knows it. His daughter senses it. But 15-year-old Gary? Gary has stopped believing entirely. What makes this dynamic so devastating isn't Wade's addiction alone. It's the cycle of hope and betrayal. Every new town represents a fresh start that Gary desperately wants to believe in, even as experience has taught him otherwise. When Wade inevitably spirals back into drinking and joblessness, Gary doesn't just lose a father figure again. He loses the small, foolish hope he allowed himself to harbor. This cycle has transformed Gary from a boy into something else entirely. A guardian, a provider, a man trapped in a teenager's body. The confrontation between father and son reveals everything. Gary doesn't plead or cry. He states facts with the weariness of someone who's had this conversation too many times. "You're just a selfish old drunk," he says, and there's no anger in it, just exhausted truth. Wade's response? Violence. Because men like Wade don't know how to process shame except through their fists. Here's what the film understands brilliantly. Abuse isn't always screaming in chaos. Sometimes it's the quiet theft of childhood, the slow erosion of trust, the normalization of dysfunction. Gary has learned to expect nothing and prepare for everything. His maturity isn't admirable. It's tragic. It's armor forged from repeated trauma. Enter Joe Ransom, and the film shifts into a completely different register. Joe runs a tree poisoning operation, killing weak growth so lumber companies can replant stronger pines. It's a perfect metaphor for what the story explores. Sometimes destruction is necessary for new growth. Joe himself is a study in contradictions. Competent yet self-destructive, kind yet capable of sudden violence, isolated yet deeply connected to his small crew. Watch how the film establishes Joe's character without exposition. He chain smokes alone. His only companion is his dog Faith. He falls asleep in front of the television in the same clothes he wore all day. This is a man who has constructed a small, controlled existence after years of chaos. The penitentiary shaped him, and now he's determined to live a life of simple routines that keep him from returning. The work Joe does is physically demanding and symbolically loaded. He is hired to poison trees, to kill what is weak so something stronger can grow in its place. Every day, he goes into the woods with his crew and systematically destroys growth that's deemed insufficient. The irony isn't subtle. Joe is doing to trees what prison tried to do to him, what society does to men like Wade, what poverty does to families like Gary's. It's eliminating what's broken to make room for something better. But the film asks, what about the people who are broken? Do they deserve the same treatment? Or can they be saved? Joe's crew respects him deeply. Junior, his most experienced worker, operates with an understanding of Joe's authority that goes beyond mere employment. These men know Joe's history. They know he's done time. They know he's capable of violence. But they also know he's fair, that he pays on time every Friday without fail, that he treats them with dignity. In a world where men like them are often disposable labor, Joe offers something rare: consistency and respect. But control is an illusion, isn't it? Joe's past literally comes shooting at him in the form of Willie Russell, a violent criminal with a grudge. Joe takes a shotgun blast to the shoulder and barely flinches. He doesn't call the police. He doesn't seek revenge immediately. He just treats the wound and goes about his business. This reaction tells us everything. Joe has been hurt so many times that physical pain barely registers. He's learned to compartmentalize, to survive, to keep moving. Willie Russell represents everything Joe has tried to leave behind. Willie is chaos, vindictiveness, and unrestrained violence. He's what Joe could have become if he'd continued down his old path. The shotgun blast isn't just physical assault. It's the past refusing to stay buried. Willie cleaning his fingerprints off the gun while shaking reveals something important. Willie is afraid of consequences in a way Joe isn't. Joe has already paid his debt to society. Willie is still running. The moment Gary appears in the woods, asking for work, is the film's true beginning. Think about the courage this requires. A 15-year-old boy with zero leverage, living with an abusive drunk, approaches a stranger and asks for a job for himself and his worthless father. 45 seconds to tell me why I should hire you, Joe says, testing him. Gary doesn't grovel or make excuses. He simply stands there, meeting Joe's eyes, demonstrating the only currency he has, his willingness to work. Joe recognizes something in Gary. Maybe it's the boy's desperate determination. Maybe it's the quiet competence he shows when learning to use the machete. Or maybe Joe sees his younger self, someone trying to escape a toxic situation through sheer force of will. Whatever the reason, Joe gives Gary a chance, and that single act of faith becomes the foundation of everything that follows. Junior takes Gary under his wing immediately, showing him the ropes with patience and humor. "You got to swear on something," he says, creating a moment of ritual that welcomes Gary into the crew. These men recognize Gary's situation without him having to explain it. They've all known boys like him, or perhaps they were boys like him once. Their acceptance isn't charity. It's recognition of shared struggle. The machete work Gary does is brutal. Clearing bushes in the oppressive heat, swinging the blade over and over until your arms scream. But Gary attacks it with a focus that impresses even the veteran workers. He's not just working for money. He's working for dignity, for purpose, for proof that he's worth something. When Junior tells him, "You did a good job," Gary's face lights up in a way that breaks your heart. How starved for approval must this kid be that a simple compliment from a stranger means everything? That night, when Gary counts his money alone, his joy is pure and childlike. For a moment, he's just a 15-year-old excited about his first paycheck. But then he returns home to Wade, passed out on the floor, and reality crashes back. The film constantly does this, offers Gary glimpses of normalcy and hope, and reminds us of the toxic environment waiting for him. The film brilliantly contrasts Gary and Wade through their first day at work. Gary absorbs instruction, works tirelessly, respects the hierarchy. Wade complains, drinks the crew's water, and does nothing. Wade treats the job as beneath him, as if his circumstances are someone else's fault. He's the embodiment of entitled victimhood. Life has been unfair to him, so why should he try? Junior's confrontation with Wade is direct and deserved. "Don't you hear? I'm your phone." Wade has violated the unspoken rules of working-class solidarity. He's taken without contributing. By day's end, Joe fires Wade, but keeps Gary. This should be a victory for Gary, but watch what happens. Wade immediately steals his son's earnings right in front of Joe. It's a power move, a reassertion of control, and a reminder that Gary can never fully escape his father's grasp. "What are you looking at?" Wade challenges Joe, daring him to intervene. It's thus the question of a man who knows he is untouchable because Joe can't help Gary without making things worse. Joe witnesses this theft and does nothing. Why? Because Joe understands boundaries in a way that many people don't. He could intervene, could threaten Wade, could play the hero. But that would make Gary's situation worse once Joe leaves. So Joe restrains himself, even as something in him recognizes the injustice. This moment plants a seed, though. Joe can't unsee what he's witnessed. The scene where Wade and Gary share a rare moment of connection is devastatingly bittersweet. Wade, drunk in the dirt, teaches Gary how to dance. For a few minutes, they're just father and son, laughing together. This is what makes Wade's villainy so painful. He's capable of moments of humanity, of affection, of being the father Gary desperately needs. But these moments are islands in an ocean of abuse. They give Gary just enough to keep hoping, which makes each betrayal more devastating. Gary's encounter with Willie on the bridge reveals the predatory nature of men like Willie. When Willie starts insinuating vile things about Dorothy, Gary's blood runs cold. He's not naive. He knows exactly what Willie means. And when Willie pins him against a tree, Gary fights back with everything he has. What's soul-crushing is that Wade sees this happening and does nothing. He watches his teenage son fight for his life against a grown man and stands there, paralyzed by cowardice or indifference, or both. This moment crystallizes Gary's reality. He cannot rely on his father for protection. He cannot trust Wade to defend him or Dorothy. He is alone in a world of predatory men, with only his own strength and wits to keep him safe. No 15-year-old should have to live this way, but Gary has no choice. He beats Willie, walks away with his useless father, and adds another layer to his armor. When Gary shows up at Joe's house soaking wet in the rain, begging for his job back, everything shifts. Joe doesn't just see a desperate kid anymore. He sees someone willing to walk through a storm for the chance to work. He sees pride and determination despite crushing circumstances. Joe takes Gary to the store, buys him food, gives him his job back. But more importantly, he begins to invest emotionally in this boy's survival. The grocery store scene is crucial because it shows Joe extending kindness without condescension. He doesn't lecture Gary or make him feel small. He just buys him food and makes a practical arrangement. Come to the store in the morning, and I'll pick you up. It's simple, transactional, but underneath it is care. Joe is creating structure and reliability in Gary's chaotic life. Joe's home life reveals a man haunted by isolation. Faith, his dog, is his primary companion. Connie, the young woman who arrives seeking shelter from an abusive home, represents another person damaged by domestic violence. Joe's decision to let her stay isn't charity, it's recognition. He sees in Connie the same desperation he saw in Gary, the same need for escape. But when Connie eventually leaves, Joe doesn't chase her or guilt her. He understands that people need to figure things out on their own terms. The film understands that mentorship doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. It accumulates in small moments. Joe teaching Gary to drive. Joe giving him the old truck. Joe warning him about waving at cops. Joe sharing his lighter as a keepsake. These aren't charity. They're acts of recognition. Joe sees Gary as someone worth investing in, someone who reminds him that damaged people can still choose to do right. The truck becomes a symbol of autonomy and manhood. When Gary announces he wants to buy Joe's old truck, Joe initially resists. He knows there are better vehicles out there. But Gary insists, and Joe understands why. It's not about the truck itself. It's about Gary having something of his own, something he earned, something that represents his independence from Wade's chaos. When they shake on the deal, it's more than a transaction. It's a rite of passage. Meanwhile, Wade spirals further into depravity. The sequence depicting the killing of an unhoused individual for alcohol is captured with an unsettling matter-of-fact tone. Wade's actions are immediate. No internal struggle, no second thoughts. He's so far gone that human life matters less than alcohol. This is unpresented as a moment of traumatic evil, but as the logical endpoint of Wade's immoral collapse. The film refuses to make Wade interesting or complex in his villainy. He's simply pathetic, and that makes him more frightening. What's especially horrifying is Wade's complete lack of remorse. He drinks the dead man's wine, robs his body, and walks away as if nothing happened. This is a man whose humanity has been completely consumed by addiction. There's no person left inside, just craving and selfishness. The film doesn't ask us to sympathize with Wade or understand his pain. It asks us to recognize that some people become so damaged that they're beyond redemption. Joe's own demons manifest differently. When Willie threatens Gary at the bar, Joe explodes with violence. When the guard dog at the brothel annoys him, Joe deliberately brings his own dog to end its life. When police try to pull him over, he beats up an officer and flees. Joe isn't reformed. He's contained. The difference is crucial. Joe has built walls around his worst impulses, but those walls are fragile. The right pressure makes them crumble. The establishment scenes display Joe's isolation and his quest for companionship through purely commercial means. He can't form normal relationships. His past and his nature prevent that. So he seeks comfort in places where emotion isn't required. But even there, he's thwarted by the guard dog, by his own impatience, by his inability to just be present anywhere. The fact that Joe brings Faith to kill the other dog shows how quickly his problem-solving turns violent. It's instinctive, almost reflexive. When Faith runs away during the arrest, it's devastating because she represents Joe's only uncomplicated relationship. Faith doesn't judge him. She doesn't fear him. She just loves him. Losing her, even temporarily, strips away Joe's last source of comfort. The search for Faith becomes a metaphor for Joe searching for something pure in his life, something untainted by violence and regret. Sheriff Earl represents the thin line between law enforcement and criminality in this world. He's Joe's friend, but also the person who will eventually have to arrest him again. Earl's warning to Joe is delivered with genuine concern. Why you want to go back to the damn penitentiary, man? Earl knows that Joe is one bad decision away from throwing his life away. He's trying to save Joe from himself, but both men know Joe's nature makes that nearly impossible. The letter from Connie that Joe reads while Earl visits shows another person Joe tried to help, another connection that didn't last. Connie has left to figure things out on her own, and Joe accepts this with quiet resignation. He's used to people leaving. He's used to being alone. The only difference now is that he has Gary, and Gary needs him in a way that makes leaving impossible. Gary's decision to drive brings out a paternal side of Joe we haven't fully seen. Joe tosses him the keys without hesitation, trusts him despite his age and inexperience. During the drive, Joe offers life advice disguised as driving tips. Don't wave to them. They know you're guilty of something when you wave. It's darkly humorous, but also genuine wisdom from someone who learned the hard way how to survive in a world that's watching you. When they find Faith standing on the street waiting, Joe's relief is palpable. Dog likes you, he tells Gary, and it's true. Faith has bonded with Gary the same way Joe has. They're forming a makeshift family, an ex-con, a traumatized kid, and a loyal dog. It's not conventional, but it's real. Joe giving Gary his lighter is loaded with symbolism. It's a token of trust, a keepsake, a gesture that says, you matter to me. In working-class culture, these small objects carry enormous weight. They represent connection and continuity. Gary will carry that lighter and remember Joe every time he uses it. It's a promise that they're bound together now, for better or worse. The encounter where Joe gives Wade a ride home reveals Joe's growing protective instinct toward Gary. When Wade starts bad-mouthing his son, Joe snaps. He threatens Wade with barely contained violence. It's a warning. I'm watching you. If you hurt this kid again, there will be consequences. Wade, coward that he is, backs down immediately. He recognizes that Joe is dangerous in a way Wade himself is not. Wade hurts people weaker than him. Joe hurts people who deserve it. Joe's decision to buy a new truck and give his old one to Gary is a massive gesture. Joe refuses payment, instead promising to help Gary with insurance. This generosity isn't about money. It's about giving Gary the tools for independence. The truck represents freedom, opportunity, a way out. Joe is investing in Gary's future in the most concrete way possible. But Joe's self-destructive nature won't stay quiet. The incident with the young police officer shows how quickly Joe can sabotage himself. The officer was polite, professional, following protocol. But Joe perceives it as disrespect, as an attempt to control him, and he reacts with violence. The high-speed chase and subsequent beating of the officer almost destroy everything Joe has built. It's a reminder that progress isn't linear, that old patterns die hard, that men like Joe are always one bad moment away from losing everything. Sheriff Earl's final warning carries the weight of friendship and duty. He protects Joe this time, makes excuses for him, but he can't keep doing it. Get your act together, or end up back in prison, he says, and both men know it's the truth. Joe is running out of second chances. The system has been surprisingly patient, but that patience has limits. Dorothy's muteness throughout the film speaks to trauma that transcends words. She's witnessed her father's abuse, her mother's helplessness, her brother's struggles. By shutting down verbally, she's protecting herself from a reality too painful to articulate. Gary's desperation to protect her reveals his deepest fear, that the dysfunction consuming his family will destroy the one innocent person left. Dorothy represents everything Gary is fighting for, the possibility of preserving something pure despite the surrounding rot. The night Gary shows up at Joe's house beaten and desperate, we see how far Wade has fallen. He's not just stealing from Gary anymore. He's stolen the truck, stolen Gary's autonomy, stolen his hope. But worse is coming. When Gary reveals that Wade has taken Dorothy to sell her to Willie, we cross a line from which there's no return. This isn't addiction or weakness or dysfunction. This is evil. Pure, calculated evil. Wade's negotiation with Willie is shot with cold detachment. He's selling his preteen daughter for $60. He introduces her to her rapist. He locks her in the truck and walks away. The film doesn't sensationalize this horror. It presents it factually, which makes it more disturbing. Wade has become a monster, and there's no redemption available for him anymore. He's crossed into territory from which no one returns. Joe's decision to help Gary is instantaneous. There's no debate, no weighing of consequences. He packs his gun, gets in the truck, and drives toward danger without hesitation. This is Joe's moment of clarity. Everything in his life has led to this. The prison time, the violence, the isolation, the connection with Gary. He knows this might end badly. He knows he might not come back. But some things are worth dying for, and protecting Gary and Dorothy is one of them. The instructions Joe gives Gary before the confrontation reveal his acceptance of potential death. If anything happens to me, you get your ass out of the way. You hear? You take my truck and get out. Joe is prepared to sacrifice himself. He's made peace with it. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Joe has found something worth dying for. Not revenge, not pride, but protecting two kids from the horror their father has become. The confrontation on the bridge is tense and chaotic. Joe holds Willie and his accomplice at gunpoint while Gary rescues Dorothy. The plan is working until shots come from an unexpected direction. Willie drops dead, shot by Wade, who has apparently had some final moment of conscience, or self-hatred, or both. but it's too late for redemption. Wade has already done the unforgivable. Joe's pursuit of Wade onto the bridge isn't about justice or revenge. It's about ending the threat Wade poses to Gary and Dorothy forever. Joe shoots and misses twice, runs out of bullets. It doesn't matter. Wade, perhaps in his only act of responsibility in the entire film, takes matters into his own hands. He jumps from the bridge, choosing death over capture, over having to face what he's become, over seeing the hatred in his children's eyes. Joe's death from his gunshot wound is heartbreaking precisely because it arrives just as he has found purpose. For years, Joe existed without truly living. He worked, he drank, he visited brothels, he fell asleep in front of the TV. Then Gary entered his life. And suddenly, Joe had someone to mentor, to protect, to care about. He found redemption not through religion or therapy, but through relationship. And just as he grasps this meaning, it's taken away. But here's the thing about redemption. It doesn't require the redeemed person to survive. Joe's sacrifice transforms Gary's trajectory permanently. Gary drives Joe's truck with faith beside him. He gets a job at planting the land his mentor once poisoned. The symbolism is perfect. Gary is now doing the work of renewal, of creating new growth from destroyed ground. Joe's final gift wasn't just the truck or the job reference. It was showing Gary that someone damaged can still choose to be good, that violence can be channeled toward protection, that caring for someone else gives life meaning. Gary's emotional farewell to the dying Joe is one of the film's most powerful moments. There are no grand speeches, no Hollywood dramatics. Just a boy losing the only father figure he's ever really had, and a man dying knowing he did something that mattered. Joe doesn't get to see Gary grow up, doesn't get to see him succeed, doesn't get to see the man Gary will become, but he knows he changed the trajectory. He knows he broke the cycle. This film is really about chosen family versus biological family. Gary's blood father betrayed him repeatedly, stole from him, endangered his sister, and offered nothing but pain. Joe, a stranger with a criminal past, taught Gary to work, to drive, to survive. He protected Gary when it mattered most, even knowing it would cost him everything. The film asks us to reconsider what fatherhood really means. Is it biology? Or is it showing up, teaching, sacrificing, and demonstrating through action that someone's life matters? The rural American setting isn't incidental. This is a world where economic desperation forces people into brutal work poisoning trees, where brothels operate openly and law enforcement is compromised, where men like Willie prey on the vulnerable without consequence until violence meets violence. The film doesn't romanticize poverty or rural life. It shows how limited options create cycles of abuse and addiction that destroy generations. The film also examines masculinity in its various toxic and redemptive forms. Wade represents masculinity as dominance and abuse. He controls through violence and intimidation, but it's the weakness of a coward. Willie represents masculinity as predation. He preys on the vulnerable and uses power to take what he wants. Joe represents something different. Masculinity is protection and mentorship. Joe is violent, yes, but his violence has purpose. He uses his capacity for damage to shield those who can't shield themselves. The economic dimension cannot be ignored. Gary works for pennies doing backbreaking labor. His truck is old and barely functional. His family lives in poverty, so deep that $60 is enough for Wade to sell his daughter. This isn't poverty as a plot device. It's poverty as a trap. The film shows how limited resources force impossible choices, how desperation breeds exploitation, how the working class cannibalizes itself when there's nothing left. Joe's business of poisoning trees for lumber companies is capitalism in miniature. He's paid to destroy one thing so something more profitable can take its place. The weak trees are worthless, so they must be eliminated. It's social Darwinism applied to forestry. But the film asks, What about the weak people? Do we just poison them too and wait for something stronger? Or do some of us have a responsibility to protect what's vulnerable? Faith, the dog, serves as a symbol of loyalty and uncomplicated love. She doesn't care about Joe's past or his violence. She just loves him. When Faith runs away during the arrest, it represents Joe losing his last connection to innocence. When Gary helps find her, it's the moment their bond solidifies. And when Faith sits beside Gary in Joe's truck at the end, it's a passing of responsibility. Gary is now Faith's protector, just as Joe was Gary's protector. The film's pacing mirrors the rhythms of working-class life. Long stretches of routine work punctuated by sudden violence. Days of quiet desperation interrupted by moments of crisis. There's no artificial urgency, no manufactured tension. The danger is always present, simmering under the surface, waiting to explode. This patient approach makes the violence, when it comes, feel earned and inevitable rather than gratuitous. Junior and the crew represent the community that Joe has built despite his isolation. These men accept Joe's leadership, respect his competence, and overlook his flaws because he treats them fairly. In a world where working people are often disposable, Joe offers dignity. He pays on time. He doesn't cheat them. He shares his knowledge. Hollywood loves redemption arcs, loves showing the worst people finding salvation at the last moment. But Wade doesn't get that. He's given opportunities to change, to be better, to protect his family. He rejects every single one. His final act, killing Willie and jumping off the bridge, isn't redemption. It's just the last spasm of a man who's destroyed everything he touched. The film asks us to accept that some people are beyond saving, and our energy is better spent protecting their victims. What haunts me most about this story is how easily Gary could have become Wade. Born into dysfunction, raised in chaos, taught that men solve problems with fists and bottles. The cycle was there, ready to consume him. But Gary made different choices at every turn. He asked for work instead of stealing. He protected his sister instead of abandoning her. He sought out a mentor instead of surrendering to hopelessness. And crucially, that mentor appeared. Joe could have ignored Gary, fired him after the first day, refused to get involved. But he didn't. The film's final image, Gary driving to his new job with Faith, represents a cycle broken. Gary is now doing the work of renewal, literally replanting what was destroyed. He carries Joe's dog, Joe's truck, and Joe's lesson that your past doesn't determine your future, that damaged people can still do good, that showing up for someone else is the highest form of redemption. This story destroys the myth of the self-made man. Gary doesn't succeed alone through grit and determination. He succeeds because someone intervened. Joe doesn't find redemption through solitary reflection. He finds it through relationship, through caring for someone else, through choosing to protect rather than destroy. We need each other. Especially the broken among us need those who are slightly less broken to extend a hand. The film also confronts us with uncomfortable questions about violence. Joe is violent. He beats people, he threatens. He kills a dog, he assaults a police officer. But he also saves Gary and Dorothy. The film doesn't sanitize Joe's violence or pretend it's noble. It shows violence for what it is: ugly, destructive, and sometimes necessary. Joe isn't a hero despite his violence. He's a hero who happens to be violent. And we have to reconcile those contradictions, because people are complicated and morality isn't clean. So here's what I'm left thinking about. How many Garys are out there right now, trapped in cycles of abuse and addiction, desperately needing just one person to believe in them? And how many potential Joes walk past these kids every day, too wrapped up in their own struggles to notice? Redemption isn't a solo journey. It requires someone willing to extend a hand, even when they're barely holding on themselves. What if the greatest act of heroism isn't saving the world, but simply showing up for one person when it matters most? What if redemption looks less like transformation and more like choosing, in one critical moment, to protect instead of destroy? And what if the measure of a life isn't how it ends, but what it gives to those who survive? Joe Ransom's final moments came on that bridge from a bullet wound, yet his sacrifice held meaning. He secured Gary's tomorrow. He broke a cycle of abuse that could have continued for generations. He proved that even men with darkness in their past can choose light when it matters. That's not a small thing. That's everything. And Gary? Gary drives forward with faith beside him, carrying the memory of the only father who ever really showed up. He's planting trees now instead of poisoning them. He's creating growth instead of destroying it. The cycle is broken, the pattern interrupted, the future changed. Because one broken man decided that one broken boy was worth saving. That's the whole story. Not about perfection, but about choice. Not about transformation, but about showing up. Not about redemption that erases the past, but about redemption that acknowledges it and chooses better anyway. In a world full of Wades and Willies, we need more Joes. Flawed, violent, damaged Joes who nonetheless decide that protecting the vulnerable matters more than protecting themselves. What will you choose when your moment comes?